My pregnant sister demanded I pay for her baby. When I refused, she and her boyfriend broke into my house. "You're just mad because you're broken inside," she sneered. I started laughing hysterically. Then the police arrived with handcuffs. "Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. My life, before all of this, was defined by its quietness. And I cherished that quiet. I'd worked incredibly hard for it. I live in one of those small, unassuming American towns where the biggest news of the week might be the high school football game or a bake sale at the church. It's the kind of place where you can't go to the grocery store without seeing at least 3 people you know. I'm in my late 30s, single, but perfectly content in my solitude. My world is my little house, a cozy bungalow I bought with my own savings, and my garden, which is my pride and joy. Tending to my roses and tomatoes is my therapy, it's where I find my peace. My job in administration at the local community college is stable, it pays the bills, and it allows me to live this simple, predictable life. And I wouldn't have it any other way. This peace was something I consciously built, brick by brick, as a sanctuary from a childhood that was anything but peaceful. My family tree isn't just a tree, it's a tangled, overgrown thicket with some very twisted branches. My father was a charming man, the kind of man who could talk anyone into anything, but he couldn't seem to talk himself into keeping his promises, especially the one he made to my mother at the altar. Their divorce was the defining event of my childhood, a messy, drawn-out affair that left scars on everyone. After they split, he went on to have other children with other women, leaving a trail of broken hearts in his wake. That's how I came to have 2 half-sisters, Lorraine and Brenda. Lorraine is a year younger than me, the quiet, thoughtful one. Brenda is 2 years older, the fiery, ambitious one. We all share a father, but we had very different mothers and vastly different upbringings. Despite the awkward circumstances, the 3 of us girls always made an effort. Growing up, we were a strange little trio, bound by this one man who was the source of both our connection and our pain. We'd cling to each other during awkward holiday visits, a silent alliance against the adult drama swirling around us. My mother, a saint if there ever was one, always treated them like her own. When they'd come for their court-ordered weekends, she'd have their favorite snacks waiting and would help them with their homework, never showing an ounce of resentment. My father's parents, on the other hand, were cut from a different cloth. They were stern, old-fashioned people, and in their rigid worldview, my sisters were illegitimate. Their will was a cold reflection of that belief. When they passed away, everything they had was left to me, their only legal grandchild. It wasn't a massive fortune, just enough for a secure down payment on my house and a cushion for the future. But the moment I saw my name as the sole beneficiary, a wave of guilt washed over me. It felt fundamentally wrong. So, without telling anyone but my lawyer, I took a piece of that small inheritance and split it between Lorraine and Brenda. It wasn't their fault our family was a catastrophe, and more than anything, I wanted them to know they weren't alone, that they had a sister who had their back. Lorraine cried when I told her. She used the money as a down payment for a reliable car to get her to and from nursing school. Brenda said a quick thank you, and the money vanished within a few months on what she called an investment in herself, which I later found out was a luxury vacation. That should have been my first real warning sign, a glaring red flag, but I chose to ignore it. I wanted to believe the best of my sister. For years after that, our lives diverged. I built my quiet world here. Lorraine graduated, became a fantastic nurse, and moved a few states away with her long-term girlfriend, finally finding the stability she always craved. And Brenda, well, Brenda was always chasing a bigger, brighter life. She hopped from city to city, from one grand plan to the next, always searching for a shortcut to the success she felt she deserved. Then, about 2 years ago, my phone rang. It was Brenda, her voice bubbling with excitement. She'd been accepted into a prestigious graduate program on a student visa. It was a fantastic opportunity, but there was a catch. She needed a place to stay, just for a little while, she said, just until she got on her feet. My heart, as it always did with her, softened. I remembered all those years we felt like outsiders in our own family, and the thought of her being alone in a new place was too much to bear. Of course, I said, the words leaving my lips before I had a chance to think. You can stay with me. I thought I was doing the right thing, the sisterly thing. I thought I was helping to mend the broken pieces of our family. I had no idea I was unlocking the front door and personally inviting in a hurricane. Brenda arrived on a Tuesday in September, a whirlwind of motion and noise. She showed up with 2 suitcases so heavy the delivery driver grunted as he set them on my porch, and she carried an air of triumphant expectation, as if she were a visiting royal. My little house seemed to shrink in her presence. I had spent the entire weekend preparing. I cleared out the guest room, put the best set of fresh sheets on the bed, and even bought a small bouquet of her favorite flowers, daisies, to put on the nightstand. I wanted everything to be perfect, a soft place for her to land. Oh, this is cozy, Audrey, she said as she breezed past me, her eyes doing a quick, critical scan of my living room. It was the way she said cozy that pricked at me, the verbal equivalent of a pat on the head. I ignored the feeling and walked her through the arrangement I'd carefully planned, wanting to set clear but kind expectations from the start. Look, I started, aiming for a casual, no big deal tone. I want you to be comfortable here, so please don't worry about rent or utilities. I've got all that covered. The grocery bills are on me, too. I just want you to be able to focus on school and get settled. Your student visa allows for a part-time job on campus, right? So whatever you make there can be your personal spending money. The only thing I ask is that you help me keep the place tidy. You know, just basic stuff, wash your own dishes, help with the vacuuming on weekends. That's it. She flashed a brilliant, 1,000-watt smile. Deal. You are seriously the best, little sis. I promise you won't even know I'm here. For the first few weeks, it was almost like a dream. It felt like a slumber party from our childhood. We'd stay up late, curled on the sofa with a bowl of popcorn between us, watching old black and white movies and laughing until our sides hurt. It felt like we were finally getting the chance to be the sisters we never could be when we were kids. I felt a sense of hope, a belief that this was a new, better chapter for us. But slowly, like a subtle change in the weather, things began to shift. The promise that I wouldn't even know she was here became a bitter irony. I started to feel her presence everywhere, in the messes she left behind. Her dirty dishes would sit in the sink, attracting flies, until my own sense of hygiene forced me to wash them. The vacuum cleaner in the closet became a forgotten relic. The first time I brought it up, I was gentle. Hey, Bren, do you think you could give the living room a quick vacuum this afternoon? I'm swamped with work. She looked up from her laptop, annoyed at the interruption. Oh, I can't. I have a huge paper due tomorrow. I'm just so swamped. The excuses became a daily occurrence. She was too tired, too stressed, her classes were too demanding. One Friday evening, I came home after a particularly draining day. My boss had been micromanaging a project, my salary felt like it was stretched thinner than ever, and all I craved was the quiet comfort of my own home. I walked in the door to find the living room in a state of chaos. Brenda's textbooks and notebooks were strewn across the floor, empty chip bags and soda cans littered the coffee table, and she was lounging on the sofa, painted toenails propped up, scrolling endlessly on her phone. Hey, I said, the word coming out heavier than I intended. Hey, she mumbled, her eyes glued to the screen. A moment passed. So what's the plan for dinner? I'm starving. A hot, prickly feeling washed over me. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I don't have a plan, Brenda. I just walked in the door from a 9-hour workday. She finally looked up, her brow creased not with empathy, but with irritation. Well, I had a 3-hour seminar on postmodern theory today. It was exhausting. I can't be expected to cook. I'm not asking you to cook, I said, my voice tight. But the agreement was that we'd both pitch in. This place is a mess. I gestured at the room around us. She let out an exaggerated sigh and rolled her eyes, a gesture of pure, teenage disdain. Relax, Audrey. God, you're so uptight. It's just a little mess. I'll get to it later. But later was a mythical time that never arrived. That night, after she went to bed, I was the one who picked up her trash, stacked her books, and wiped down the sticky rings on the coffee table. As I cleaned up her mess in the quiet of my own home, a profound sense of loneliness settled over me. This wasn't a partnership. It wasn't sisterhood. I was the maid. I was the manager of a free, all-inclusive hotel for one. And my guest, my own sister, didn't just lack gratitude, she seemed to lack the basic awareness that I was a person, too, with my own limits and my own exhaustion. The hope I'd felt just a few weeks prior was beginning to curdle into a bitter, heavy resentment. About 3 months after Brenda moved in, she announced she was in love. His name was Walter. The first time she said his name, her face was transformed. She was radiant, giddy, a version of my sister I hadn't seen since we were teenagers with silly crushes. A part of me was genuinely happy for her, hoping that a stable relationship might ground her and bring some positivity into her life, and by extension, into my house. Then, I met him. And that hope died a quick, quiet death. She brought him over for dinner one Friday night. The moment he stepped through my front door, every nerve in my body went on high alert. It wasn't that he was overtly menacing. He was handsome, in a slick, polished way, with expensive shoes and a watch that was probably worth more than my car. But there was an unsettling energy about him, a predatory stillness beneath the smooth charm. He had a way of looking at you, a confident, appraising gaze that made you feel like you were a specimen under a microscope. His smile was a perfectly executed maneuver that never, not once, reached his cold, calculating eyes. Dinner was an ordeal. He held court at my small dining table, telling loud, boastful stories about his business ventures and name-dropping people I was sure he'd never met. He barely looked at me, directing all his energy toward Brenda, who hung on his every word like he was a prophet. The few times he did address me, his comments were laced with a subtle condescension. "Brenda tells me you're the responsible one, the one with the stable job," he said with a smirk, gesturing around my simple living room. "Guess it pays the bills, huh? Keeps a roof over everyone's head." It was phrased like a compliment, but it felt like an insult, a dismissal of my entire life. I just smiled tightly and asked him to pass the salt. After he finally left, leaving a lingering scent of expensive, cloying cologne in his wake, I tried to voice my concerns to Brenda. I chose my words carefully. "He's certainly confident," I began. "Isn't he incredible?" she gushed, her eyes shining. "He's so driven, so ambitious. He's going to be a millionaire before he's 40. He just seems a little intense." I tried again. "There's something about him. I don't feel comfortable with him here in the house, Brenda." Her happy expression dissolved instantly, replaced by a defensive scowl. "What is that supposed to mean? Are you saying he's not good enough for me? You've met him for 2 hours and you've already decided you don't like him?" "No, it's not that," I backpedaled, not wanting a fight. "It's just a gut feeling. My home is my safe space, you know? I'd just be more comfortable if you two hung out at his place, or went out." She huffed but eventually agreed, though it was clear she thought I was being ridiculous. Of course, that agreement lasted less than a week. I started coming home from work to find his shiny black car parked in my driveway. At first, she'd have a flimsy excuse ready. "Oh, he just popped in to help me with a printer issue." Soon, the excuses stopped. He was just there, a permanent fixture on my sofa, his feet propped up on my coffee table as if he owned the place. The atmosphere in my own home became tense and suffocating. Walter seemed to derive a strange pleasure from pushing my boundaries, from seeing how much he could get away with. He'd walk into a room and stand uncomfortably close, invading my personal space. He developed a habit of accidentally brushing up against me in the narrow hallway. The final straw came one Saturday afternoon. I was in the kitchen, up to my elbows in flour, trying to de-stress by baking a loaf of bread. He came in to get a drink from the fridge. As he walked past me, he let his hand trail across the small of my back, a deliberate, lingering touch. He leaned in close, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper right next to my ear. "You know, you have a very exotic look to you, Audrey. Very different from your sister." I froze completely, my hands still in the dough. A wave of revulsion washed over me, so strong it made me feel dizzy. A hot, angry flush crawled up my neck. I felt trapped, violated, right there in the heart of my own home. I whipped around, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Don't touch me," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but shaking with fury. He just chuckled, that same oily, soulless smile on his face. "Hey, I'm just being friendly. Giving you a compliment." I looked past him, my eyes desperately seeking out my sister, who was standing in the doorway to the living room, holding her phone, watching the entire exchange. I waited, my breath held, for her to say something, to defend me, to tell this man to back off and show some respect. She just looked from him to me and gave a little shrug. "Oh, don't be so sensitive, Audrey," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "He's just joking around. He's a flirt." A flirt. My own sister stood there and watched a man I barely knew harass me in my own kitchen, and she brushed it off as a joke. The little alarm bell that had been ringing in the back of my mind for weeks was no longer a quiet ding. It was a deafening, screaming fire siren, and it was telling me to get out. The only problem was, I was already home. The danger wasn't outside my door, I had invited it in. The breaking point, when it finally came, wasn't a gradual crack. It was a seismic shatter, an explosion that leveled the entire foundation of what I thought my relationship with my sister was. It happened a few weeks after the incident in the kitchen, a period during which I had turned my own home into a place to be avoided. I took on extra projects at work, staying late until the campus was dark and quiet. I'd go to the grocery store and wander the aisles for an hour just to kill time. I'd sit in my car in a quiet park, reading a book under the dome light until I was sure they had gone out for the evening. My home, my sanctuary, had become enemy territory. One Saturday, desperate for a dose of normalcy, I met my old friend Sarah for coffee. We'd been friends since our chaotic college days, and she was the kind of friend who felt like coming home, no judgment, just unconditional support. We were catching up, laughing about old times, when her expression suddenly turned serious, and she started fidgeting with her coffee cup. "Hey," she said, her voice dropping, her eyes full of concern. "Can I ask you something kind of weird? And please don't be mad." "Of course, Sarah. You can ask me anything," I said, a knot of dread beginning to form in my stomach. She took a deep breath. "It's about Brenda's new boyfriend, Walter. My cousin, you know, David? He works in the same office building as him. And Walter has been talking. A lot." "Talking about what?" I asked, though a part of me didn't want to know. Sarah looked deeply uncomfortable, her gaze dropping to the table. "He's been going around telling people, he's been saying some really disgusting, awful things, Audrey. He's been bragging to his work buddies that he has this fantasy." She struggled with the word, like it was distasteful in her mouth. "And he's been telling them that Brenda is totally on board with it. A fantasy that involves you. Both of you. Together." The world tilted on its axis. The cheerful buzz of the cafe, the scent of coffee beans, the sunlight streaming through the window, it all receded into a distant, muffled roar. "He's been telling them that Brenda said you were almost ready to agree," Sarah continued, her voice filled with disgust. "That you were just playing hard to get and that she was working on convincing you to go through with it as a gift for him." I couldn't speak. The coffee cup felt like it was fused to my hands. My own sister. My sister. It wasn't just that she had dismissed my feelings or ignored my discomfort. It was 1,000 times worse. She had been actively complicit. She had been discussing me, my body, my consent, as if I were a party favor to be handed out. She had been plotting to serve me up to this vile man as a gift. The betrayal was so absolute, so monstrous, it felt like a physical tearing inside my chest. I don't remember paying the bill or saying goodbye to Sarah. My next clear memory is of my car in my driveway, the engine still running. I walked into my house on autopilot, my body moving but my mind still reeling in that coffee shop. And there they were. The two of them, curled up on my couch, sharing a bowl of popcorn, watching a comedy. Laughing. I walked over to the television and pressed the power button. The screen went black. Hey! What the hell? We were watching that, Brenda said, glaring at me. I just had coffee with Sarah, I said. My voice was eerily calm, devoid of all emotion. It scared even me. Walter's smug, self-satisfied expression didn't waver. Brenda just looked confused. And, she prompted impatiently. And she told me what Walter has been telling everyone at his work. About his little fantasy, I said, the word dripping with all the venom I felt. The one that I'm supposed to star in. A flicker of guilt, of pure panic, crossed Brenda's face. It was there for only a second, but I saw it. She knew she was caught. But just as quickly, the guilt was gone, replaced by a hard, defensive glare. Walter, unbelievably, just leaned back further into the cushions, a lazy, entitled smirk playing on his lips. He was enjoying this. So what? Brenda finally said, her voice dripping with defiance. It's just talk. A fantasy. What's the big deal? The big deal? The calm broke. My voice started to rise, trembling with a volcanic rage I didn't even know I was capable of. The big deal is that you offered me up to him like a side of fries. You were actively planning to let this garbage human put his hands on me? Your own sister? Oh, stop being so dramatic, Audrey, she sneered, her voice cold and dismissive. It would have been a favor. A family favor. He's really into you, you should be flattered. Walter decided to chime in then, his voice oozing with a smug confidence that made me want to be sick. Yeah, babe. Lighten up. Brenda said you'd be into it eventually. She said you were just playing hard to get. A little family fun. That was it. The final, soul-crushing confirmation. They weren't even denying it. They were proud of it. They had conspired against me, in my own home, under my own roof, and they saw nothing wrong with it. I looked at the woman sitting on my couch, the sister I had welcomed, housed, and fed, the sister I had shared my precious inheritance with, and I saw a complete stranger. A monster was wearing my sister's face, and she had just ripped my heart out. In that single, horrifying moment, something inside me irrevocably shifted. The years of being the accommodating one, the patient one, the one who always smoothed things over, it all burned away. The hurt, the shock, the profound disgust, it all compressed into a cold, hard diamond of resolve in my chest. The doormat was gone. In her place stood a woman who was finally, unequivocally, done. My gaze shifted from Brenda to Walter, who was still lounging on my couch as if he had every right to be there. I pointed a trembling finger at him. Get out, I said, my voice low and vibrating with a deadly intensity. Get out of my house right now. If you are not through that door in 10 seconds, I will call the police and I will tell them there is an intruder in my home who has been harassing me. And I will press charges. He actually chuckled, a short, arrogant bark of a laugh. You wouldn't dare. Watch me, I hissed, pulling my phone from my pocket and holding it up, my thumb hovering over the 911 shortcut. 10, 9, 8. The smirk finally fell from his face. He looked at Brenda, a silent command for her to fix this, to put me back in my place. But Brenda was just staring at me, her mouth slightly open, a look of stunned disbelief on her face. She had never seen this version of me before. Seeing he would get no help from her, Walter scrambled to his feet. He grabbed his leather jacket, muttering a string of vile names under his breath, and yanked the front door open so hard it banged against the wall. Then he was gone, the slam of the door echoing in the sudden, tense silence. I turned my full attention to Brenda. She was still on the couch, now looking at me with a mixture of righteous anger and utter bewilderment. "I cannot believe you just did that," she shrieked, finding her voice. "You completely embarrassed him. He's never going to forgive me." "Embarrassed him?" I let out a sharp, joyless laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Good. Now it's your turn. You have 2 weeks, Brenda. 14 days. You will pack your bags, find somewhere else to live, and get out of my house. And then, I want you out of my life. For good. We're done." Tears instantly welled in her eyes. "You can't do that. You can't just throw me out. I'm your sister. I have nowhere to go. My student visa. You should have thought about that before you tried to pimp me out to your disgusting boyfriend." I cut her off, my voice like ice. I turned my back on her, unable to look at her face for another second. 2 weeks. The clock is ticking. I walked into my bedroom and locked the door, leaning against it, my body trembling with adrenaline. I could hear her start to wail in the living room, a performance of sobs and screams about how cruel and unfair I was. I tuned it out. I felt nothing but a vast, empty numbness. The next morning, I was up before the sun. I drove to the hardware store and bought the heaviest deadbolt I could find and installed it on my bedroom door myself. Then I called a locksmith and made an appointment to have every external lock on the house changed for the morning of Brenda's deadline. I called my lawyer, the same one who handled my mother's estate, and explained the situation with Walter. She was appalled and immediately started the paperwork for a restraining order. The following 2 weeks were a special kind of hell. We coexisted in the house like two hostile ghosts, the air thick with unspoken hatred. She would slam doors. I would ignore her. She finally moved out 2 days before the deadline, leaving the guest room in a state of utter filth and disarray out of pure spite. She didn't say goodbye. She just vanished. The day after she left, I called my sister, Lorraine, and told her everything, from Walter's harassment to the disgusting fantasy plot. She was silent on the other end of the line for a long time, and then I heard a choked sob. "Oh, Audrey," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I am so sorry. I can't believe she would do that to you. I'm so sorry." Her simple, heartfelt empathy was the first crack of light in my dark, suffocating world. I spent the next month trying to exorcise their presence from my home. I threw out the sheets from the guest bed. I deep-cleaned every inch of the house. I rearranged all the furniture in the living room so it looked nothing like it did when they were there. Slowly, painstakingly, my house began to feel like my sanctuary again. The quiet returned, but it was a different, more fragile kind of quiet now. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the fighting has stopped, heavy with the memory of the violence that had taken place. It was the quiet of a wound, slowly, painfully, beginning to heal. Months bled into one another, and the traumatic edges of Brenda's stay began to soften. The silence in my life slowly lost its heavy, wounded quality and transformed back into the comfortable, restorative peace I had once known. I threw myself into my garden with a renewed passion, the physical act of nurturing life from the soil feeling like a way to nurture my own healing soul. I reconnected with Sarah and other friends I'd unintentionally pushed away during the crisis, their easy laughter and support a welcome balm. My boss at the college, noticing my renewed focus, offered me a small promotion to a department lead, a welcome surprise that came with a much-needed boost to my salary. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward. Life was becoming my own again. Brenda and Walter had receded into the dark corners of my memory, a cautionary tale, a nightmare I was finally waking up from. I hadn't heard a single word from either of them since the day Brenda left, and I sent up a silent prayer of thanks for that every single day. I had convinced myself that chapter was closed for good. Then, one Tuesday afternoon in late spring, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was Lorraine. I answered with a smile in my voice, expecting to chat about her wedding plans or her new job. "Hey, you," I said cheerfully. "How's life treating you?" There was a beat of silence on the other end, just long enough for a knot of anxiety to form in my stomach. Her voice, when it came, was strained and heavy. "Audrey, I have to tell you something. And I need you to just listen, okay? Don't freak out." My blood ran cold. "What is it, Lorraine?" "You're scaring me." I could hear her take a shaky breath. "It's Brenda. She called me this morning. She's pregnant, Audrey. And that monster, Walter, he kicked her out." I just stood there in my sunny kitchen, my hand gripping the counter so tightly my knuckles turned white. The world seemed to tilt and go gray at the edges. Pregnant. Of course, she was pregnant. It was the final, cruel, inevitable punchline to a joke I never found funny. The past wasn't buried, it had just been gestating. All I could manage to say was a single, hollow word, "Oh." "She's a complete wreck," Lorraine continued, her voice filled with a weary, pained sadness that I knew all too well. "She showed up on my doorstep with nothing but a handbag. She has no money, nowhere to go. I'm letting her stay on my couch for a few days, but Audrey, I can't keep her here. My apartment is tiny, my girlfriend is barely tolerating it, and we move in less than a month." "That is not your problem to solve, Lorraine," I said, my voice coming out flat and robotic. "And it is most definitely not mine." I know, she sighed, a sound heavy with the weight of being the family peacekeeper. "Believe me, I know. I wanted you to hear it from me before she tried to contact you." We hung up, and I stood there for a long time, just staring at the wall, a familiar wave of dread and anxiety washing over me. This wasn't over. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was only just beginning. A few minutes later, as if on cue, my phone rang again. It was an unknown number, but I knew exactly who it was. I hit ignore, my heart pounding. It went to voicemail. It immediately rang again. I ignored it again. On the fifth consecutive call, a wave of angry resolve washed over me. I was not going to hide. I answered, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. "What do you want, Brenda?" I was met with an immediate, theatrical torrent of sobs. They were loud, gulping, hysterical sobs, so perfectly performed they didn't move me one bit. "Audrey," she wailed, her voice thick with manufactured despair. "Thank God. You have to help me. I'm all alone. He just threw me and your baby out on the street like we were trash. I'm pregnant and I have nothing." I remained perfectly silent, refusing to give her anything to work with. "I have no one else to turn to," she continued, the pitch of her voice rising with desperation. "You're my only hope. I know you have that really good health insurance from the college. The one you use for Aunt Carol. It wouldn't be a big deal for you to just add me and the baby. It's a family plan, right? You have to help me pay for the doctor's bills, Audrey. This baby is your niece, or your nephew. It's family. You have to help." The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it literally took my breath away. After what she had done, after how she had conspired to violate me in the most horrific way, she was now invoking the word family as if it were a weapon she could use to force me into submission. She wasn't asking for my forgiveness. She was demanding my financial support. She kept rambling, a waterfall of self-pity and entitlement, talking about how this baby was a blessing and how I should be thrilled to help raise it. She painted a picture of herself as a tragic, wronged heroine. I listened to it all, every last pathetic, manipulative word. When she finally paused, presumably to take a breath and gauge my reaction, I spoke. My voice was quiet. It was cold. And it was absolutely final. No. And for the second time in our lives, I hung up the phone on my sister. The ghost from my past had returned, not as a haunting whisper, but as a screaming, entitled demand. And for the first time, I felt no fear, no guilt, no pity. I just felt done. My simple, one-word answer was, predictably, not the end of the story. Brenda, never one to accept rejection, launched a full-scale assault on my phone for the rest of the day. A barrage of desperate texts filled with exclamation points and guilt trips, followed by a string of voicemails, each one more hysterical than the last. I read the first few, then deleted the rest without listening and blocked her number. The peace and quiet that followed was blissful, but short-lived. The next evening, Lorraine called again. I am so sorry to even ask this, Audrey, she began, her voice heavy with the exhaustion of being stuck in the middle. But I am at my wit's end. She hasn't stopped crying for 24 hours. She's making herself sick, and frankly, she's driving me and my girlfriend insane. Can we all just meet? Just once. For dinner. In a very public place. We can talk it all through, lay all the cards on the table, and figure out a plan. After that, I swear, whatever you decide, I will back you up 100%. I just need to be able to tell Mom and everyone else that I tried everything. Lorraine has always been the family peacekeeper, the one who hates conflict more than anything. I could hear the desperation in her voice, and I knew this situation was tearing her apart. I closed my eyes, picturing Brenda's tear-streaked, manipulative face, and felt a wave of profound weariness wash over me. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want to hear her voice. But I would do this one last thing for Lorraine. Fine, I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. One dinner. At a public place. A neutral territory. And Lorraine, I am not kidding about this, if she even thinks about trying to come home with me, you'd better be ready to physically restrain her. Audrey, I will personally drag her out by her hair if I have to, Lorraine promised, and the grim determination in her voice told me she absolutely meant it. We agreed to meet at a quiet, family-style Italian restaurant in a town halfway between my house and her apartment. I arrived first, deliberately, so I could choose the most strategic table, a booth in a secluded corner, far from the main traffic of the restaurant, where we could have a difficult conversation with a minimum of public spectacle. They arrived a few minutes later. Brenda looked pale and drained. Her pregnancy was more obvious now, a small, neat bump that she cradled protectively with one hand. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, clear evidence of the crying marathon Lorraine had described. When she saw me, she tried to conjure a watery, hopeful smile. I did not return it. I simply gave her a curt nod and gestured for her to sit down. The awkwardness at the table was a physical presence, so thick you could have cut it with a bread knife. We ordered our food in near-complete silence, our interactions limited to monosyllabic requests to pass the salt or the Parmesan cheese. The waiter, a cheerful young man with a bright smile, seemed completely oblivious to the black cloud of tension hanging over our booth, his chipper questions about our day met with strained, clipped answers. Brenda, desperate to break the icy silence, kept trying to initiate small talk. This place is nice, she offered, looking around. I grunted in response. How's your garden this year, Audrey? She tried again a few minutes later. Fine, I replied, not looking up from my plate. I wasn't there to pretend everything was normal. I wasn't there to be polite. I was there to draw a final, permanent line in the sand. Finally, after the plates were cleared and we were left with 3 cups of lukewarm coffee, Lorraine took a deep breath, steeling herself for the inevitable confrontation. Okay, she said, her gaze shifting from me to Brenda and back again. We need to figure this out. Brenda, you need to hear this and accept it. You cannot stay with me long term. My girlfriend and I are moving next month, and our new apartment only has 1 bedroom. It is simply not possible. She then turned her compassionate but firm gaze on Brenda. And you need to understand that after what happened, you are incredibly lucky that Audrey even agreed to sit here tonight. She doesn't owe you anything. Brenda's lower lip began to tremble on cue. But what am I supposed to do? She whimpered, her big, tear-filled eyes locking onto mine. It was the same look she used on our dad when we were kids to get what she wanted. I have nothing. Walter took everything. I'm going to be homeless. She reached her hand across the table, her fingers outstretched, aiming for my hand in a gesture of supplication. I reacted without thinking. I pulled my hand back from the table as if her touch were toxic, tucking it safely into my lap. Her face crumpled. The rejection was so swift, so absolute, it was more powerful than any spoken word. The air crackled with it. That small, instinctive movement made it clear to everyone at the table. This wasn't a family dinner to hash things out. This was a final sentencing. And I was the judge. I let the heavy silence hang in the air for a long moment after I pulled my hand away from Brenda's grasp. Her expression of wounded hope had dissolved into one of stunned disbelief. I held her gaze, my own expression carefully neutral. The time for emotional reactions, for hurt and anger, was over. This was no longer a family drama, it was a logistical problem, and I was going to offer a set of cold, hard, logistical solutions. Lorraine is right, I began, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears. It was steady, measured, and devoid of the warmth it usually carried. It was the voice of a person who had been pushed past her breaking point and had found a new, harder foundation on the other side. I don't owe you anything, Brenda. What you did, it wasn't just a mistake. It was a fundamental betrayal of trust, of sisterhood, of basic human decency. And it's not something I can forgive or forget. I saw a flicker of protest in her eyes, but I continued before she could speak. However, I said, pausing to let the word land with its full weight, I am not a monster. I am not going to let you and an innocent child end up homeless on the street. That is not who I am. So, I am willing to help you. But let me be absolutely clear. This help will be on my terms, and my terms only. These are your only options. This is not a negotiation. This is not a conversation. This is a final offer. I leaned forward slightly, my hands clasped on the table, creating a barrier between us. Brenda and Lorraine both stared at me, their faces tense with anticipation. Option 1, I said, holding up a single finger. I will pay, in full, for you to have a termination. I will find the best private clinic. I will book you a room in a nice, quiet hotel for a full week so you can rest and recover in privacy. I will have all your meals delivered. You will not have to worry about a single thing. After that week, my help, financial and otherwise, ends completely. Brenda gasped audibly, her hand instinctively flying to her pregnant belly as if to shield it from my words. I did not flinch. I did not soften my gaze. I simply moved on. Option 2. I held up a second finger. I will buy you a one-way, non-refundable plane ticket back to our home state. Mom and Aunt Susan are still there. You can live with one of them. You'll be eligible for state-funded healthcare and WIC. You'll have a family support system to help you raise your child. The ticket will be booked in your name, for a date of your choosing within the next 2 weeks. Once you are on that plane, my financial support and my involvement in your life ends. Option 3. A third finger joined the other two. I will buy you a one-way, non-refundable plane ticket to our eldest half-brother's state. You know as well as I do that he has a big house, a stay-at-home wife, and a soft spot for any family member in trouble. I will call him myself and explain the situation, and I am certain he would take you in. Again, once that ticket is purchased, I am done. I lowered my hand and leaned back in the booth, my posture a clear signal that the presentation was over. I will also provide you with a list of nonprofit organizations that specialize in helping single mothers and the direct contact information for a highly rated adoption agency, should you decide that is the best path for you and your child. But let me be perfectly, crystal clear about what is not an option. You will not be moving in with me. I will not be adding you to my insurance. I will not be a co-signer on an apartment for you. I will not be giving you a single dime for baby supplies or your monthly living expenses. I am not going to be your emergency contact, your personal bank account, or your built-in babysitter. My life is not a resource for you to plunder anymore. The silence that followed was absolute and profound. Lorraine was looking at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated shock, as if she were seeing me for the first time. Brenda just stared, her face a mask of utter disbelief. The pleading victim act had evaporated, replaced by the slow, simmering rage of a thwarted narcissist. She had walked into this restaurant expecting me to crumble under the weight of guilt and family obligation. She had expected a tearful reconciliation and an open-ended check. Instead, I had presented her with 3 stark, unappealing doors, and she hated every single one of them because none of them led back to the easy life she believed I owed her. She finally, truly understood. This wasn't an appeal for help. It was an eviction notice from my life. Brenda's stunned disbelief quickly curdled into pure, unadulterated fury. The mask of the weeping victim fell away, revealing the ugly, sneering face of her entitlement. A termination, she hissed, her voice low and dripping with venom, causing a woman at the next table to glance over. You want me to get rid of my baby? My own sister? What kind of heartless monster are you? I'm the kind of sister who is offering you concrete solutions to a problem you created, I said, my voice remaining unnervingly calm. I refused to let her drag me down into a screaming match. These are responsible, adult choices. This isn't a problem. This is a blessing, she shrieked, her voice rising in pitch and volume. You wouldn't understand. You're just a bitter, jealous old maid. You've always been jealous of me, of my life, of the fact that I'm not afraid to go after what I want. I just looked at her, my expression as placid as a frozen lake. Her insults, once capable of wounding me, now felt like pebbles bouncing off a suit of armor. The old me, the people-pleasing me, would have been hurt. She would have tried to argue, to defend herself. But the new me, the one who had been forged in the fire of her ultimate betrayal, felt nothing but a distant, clinical pity. She must have sensed her usual attacks weren't penetrating my newfound calm, because her strategy shifted. Her attack became more intimate, more surgical, more vicious. She leaned far across the table, her eyes narrowing into malevolent slits. She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, a delivery designed to be as cruel and damaging as possible. I know what your real problem is, Audrey, she said softly, each word a poison dart. You're just mad because you can't have one of these yourself. She patted her stomach. You're mad because you're broken on the inside. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. She knew. It was my deepest, most private grief, a sorrow I had quietly carried alone for years. After a series of painful and invasive tests, a kind, white-haired doctor had sat me down and gently explained that due to a medical condition I was born with, I would never be able to conceive a child. I had accepted it, made my peace with it, but the scar was still tender. I had only ever told one person in the world, Lorraine. And Lorraine, my sweet, trusting, peace-loving sister, in a moment of misguided sisterly bonding, must have confided in Brenda, never imagining that she would one day take that sacred, painful confidence and sharpen it into a weapon. For a long, terrifying second, I couldn't breathe. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the restaurant. I saw the flash of cruel triumph in Brenda's eyes. She knew she'd landed a critical hit. A hot flash of shame, rage, and profound violation crawled up my neck. Every instinct screamed at me to lash out, to scream, to cry, to flip the table over and expose her for the monster she was. But I didn't. I held her gaze. And then, a strange and unexpected thing happened. As I looked at her twisted, hateful face, contorted with spite, something inside me finally broke for good. But it wasn't my spirit that broke, it was the last, lingering, microscopic shred of sisterly affection I still harbored for her. It snapped. And in the void it left behind, a cold, dark, and utterly liberating sense of humor began to bubble up from the depths of my soul. Seeing my pained silence, Brenda apparently mistook my shock for weakness. She thought she had me on the ropes and decided to press her advantage with a new, breathtakingly insane idea. Her vicious expression melted away, replaced by a sickly sweet, scheming smile. "You know," she said, her voice turning syrupy and false. "I just thought of another option. A perfect solution for both of us. Since you want a baby so badly, and I have one on the way that I can't exactly afford, why don't you just adopt mine? You can raise it as your own. It'll be our little secret." And I started to laugh. It wasn't a gentle, happy laugh. It was a raw, sharp, incredulous sound that tore out of my throat, loud and uninhibited. I laughed until tears streamed down my face, until my stomach ached. The sheer, mind-boggling, galactic-level audacity of it was just too much. She thought that after everything she had done, the lies, the disrespect, the ultimate betrayal, that I would want to raise her child? A living, breathing, permanent monument to her and that monster, Walter? "You," I finally gasped, wiping a tear from my eye and struggling to catch my breath. "You are truly, certifiably, and magnificently insane." Her smile vanished, as if slapped from her face. My laughter, raw and genuine, had been a more profound and absolute rejection than any argument or scream could ever be. In that moment, she finally understood the full scope of her miscalculation. She hadn't just lost my financial support. She had lost me, completely, irrevocably, and hilariously. My hysterical, unrestrained laughter was the final straw. But it wasn't me who broke. It was Lorraine. She had been sitting there throughout Brenda's vicious tirade, silent and pale, looking like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. When Brenda had thrown my infertility in my face, I saw a flash of pure agony and guilt cross Lorraine's features. She knew, in that sickening moment, exactly how Brenda had obtained that ammunition. But when Brenda followed that cruelty with her grotesque adoption offer, something inside my quiet, gentle, conflict-avoidant sister finally snapped with the force of a thunderclap. She shot to her feet so fast that her chair screeched backward on the tiled floor, the harsh sound causing everyone in our section of the restaurant to stop talking and stare. "That is it," she roared, her voice, usually so soft, echoing with a power I had never heard before. "Enough, Brenda. You will not say one more word." Brenda looked utterly stunned, as if she'd been doused with ice water. She had never, in her entire life, been the target of Lorraine's anger. None of us had. Lorraine pointed a trembling finger across the table at her. "You are a cruel, selfish, manipulative leech. You took Audrey's kindness, her home, and her money, and you spat it all back in her face. You endangered her. You disrespected her. And now you have the gall to sit here and use her deepest, most private pain against her as a bargaining chip? You are a disgusting human being." She fumbled in her purse, pulled out her wallet, and threw a handful of cash down on the table, far more than enough to cover the bill and a generous tip. "You have the options she gave you. You have until I move on Friday to choose one and get your life in order. If you don't, you are completely on your own. You are not welcome in my life, you are not welcome in my home, and you are damn sure not welcome in hers. You have lost the right to call yourself our sister." With that final, devastating pronouncement, she grabbed my arm. "We're leaving," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears of rage and sorrow. She pulled me out of the booth and practically dragged me through the restaurant, past the gawking faces of the other diners. I was still in a daze, my mind reeling from the emotional whiplash of the last 10 minutes. We burst out of the front door into the cool night air, and the moment the door swung shut behind us, cutting off the restaurant noise, I finally broke down. But they weren't the tears of pain and humiliation I would have expected. They were tears of overwhelming, cathartic relief. For my entire adult life, I had been the strong one, the responsible one, the family caregiver. I couldn't remember the last time someone had so fiercely, so completely, so unconditionally stood up for me. Lorraine immediately wrapped her arms around me in a hug so tight it almost squeezed the breath out of me. "I am so sorry, Audrey," she whispered fiercely into my hair, her own body trembling. "I am so sorry. I never should have told her. I was weak, and I thought she could be trusted. I will never forgive myself for giving her that weapon." "It's not your fault," I choked out between sobs, my face buried in her shoulder. "You didn't know." "Thank you, Lorraine." "Oh my God, thank you." We just stood there for a long time on the cracked sidewalk under the pale glow of a streetlight, holding on to each other like two survivors of a shipwreck. In that moment, amidst all the ugliness, the betrayal, and the loss, I felt a profound sense of clarity. I had truly and finally lost one sister that night, a sister who had proven to be nothing but a source of pain and chaos in my life. But I had gained another. Lorraine wasn't just my half-sister anymore, she wasn't just the peacekeeper. She was my ally. My shield. My family. We decided to skip going home and instead drove to an all-night diner for ice cream sundaes, just like we did when we were kids after our father had disappointed us yet again. It was a small, silly thing, but it felt like the perfect ritual to wash the bitter taste of Brenda out of our mouths for good. The deadline we had given Brenda was Friday at 5 p.m. That was the time Lorraine and her girlfriend had to hand over the keys to their apartment to the landlord. Brenda, in true Brenda fashion, didn't choose any of the options. She just went dark. She stopped answering Lorraine's calls and texts. A part of us, the naive part, hoped she had found some other poor soul to latch onto, or perhaps had even taken the bus back home to our mother. We were just relieved by the silence. On Wednesday, Lorraine decided to take her girlfriend out for a final, celebratory day trip. They had been planning it for weeks, a last chance to hike their favorite trails in the nearby national park before they moved across the country. She left a key for Brenda under the doormat with a note. The note said, "The offer for a plane ticket is still on the table. Here is $50 for food. Please be gone and leave the key by tomorrow night." It was a final, foolish act of pity, a gesture she would come to bitterly regret. They returned late Thursday afternoon, exhausted from the hike but happy, their car filled with the cheerful chatter of future plans. But as they turned onto their street, Lorraine's happy mood evaporated. She knew instantly that something was terribly wrong. All the lights in her apartment were on. And parked in her designated spot was Walter's shiny, black, unmistakable car. Her stomach plummeted. They raced up the stairs to their front door. Lorraine fumbled for her key, her hands shaking, and tried to put it in the lock. It wouldn't fit. Confused, she tried again, thinking she had the wrong key. That's when she saw it. The entire deadbolt was different. It was a new, brass-colored lock, not the old, silver one that had been there that morning. They had changed the locks. She started banging on the door with both fists. "Brenda! What is going on in there? Open this door right now." The door opened a few inches, held by the security chain. Walter's smug, hateful face appeared in the crack. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice dripping with mock politeness, as if he were a stranger addressing a lost traveler. "Walter?" Lorraine was so stunned she could barely speak. "What the hell are you doing here? Where is Brenda? Let me into my house." "Your house?" he laughed, a nasty, grating sound. "I think you're mistaken. This is our house now. You should probably leave before I call the cops on you for trespassing." He tried to slam the door shut, but Lorraine, in a surge of adrenaline-fueled rage, shoved it open with all her might, snapping the flimsy chain from the doorframe. And there was Brenda, standing in the middle of the living room, her arms crossed defiantly over her pregnant belly. The entire apartment had been transformed into a hostile territory. Lorraine's carefully packed boxes were shoved into a corner, and in their place sat Walter's ugly, oversized leather furniture. They had staged a full-on, illegal occupation. Lorraine didn't scream or argue. She just stared at the scene for a second, her face a mask of cold fury, then pulled out her phone and dialed 911. Her voice was shaking but clear as she explained that her apartment had been broken into and was being illegally occupied. That's when my phone rang. I heard the panic in Lorraine's voice and my blood ran cold. Audrey, you are not going to believe this. Get over here right now. They've taken over my apartment. The police are on their way. I broke every speed limit getting there. I pulled up to a scene of flashing red and blue lights, a small crowd of curious neighbors gathering on their lawns to watch the drama unfold. I found Lorraine standing with 2 police officers on the sidewalk, desperately trying to explain the insane situation. Brenda and Walter, for their part, were putting on an Oscar-worthy performance. "This is our house, officer," Brenda wailed, clutching her stomach and swaying as if she might faint. "She's my crazy, jealous sister. She's trying to throw me, a helpless pregnant woman, out onto the street." The officers, a man and a woman, looked utterly exhausted. This was the last call of their shift, a messy, he said she said domestic dispute, and they just wanted it to be over. "All right, everyone, let's just calm down," the male officer said, his voice tired and heavy. "We can sort this out. I need to see some ID and some proof of residence from everyone. A lease, a utility bill, anything with your name and this address on it." That was their fatal miscalculation. Lorraine and her girlfriend immediately produced their driver's licenses, which listed the apartment's address, and a copy of their lease agreement from their glove compartment. Walter swaggered forward and handed the officer his ID. Then the officer turned to Brenda. "Ma'am? Your ID?" Brenda's face went chalk white. I must have left it in my purse inside." "Go get it, then, please," the officer said patiently. She scurried inside and came back a minute later, wringing her hands, her face a mask of panic. "I can't seem to find it. But I have my passport." She handed it to him, her last-ditch effort. The officer opened the small blue book, looked at it for a long moment, flipped through the pages, and then looked back at her, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am," he said slowly and deliberately. "This passport expired 6 months ago. And the student visa stamp in here expired before that. According to this document, your legal right to be in this country is no longer valid." The air went completely still. The only sound was the crackle of the police radio. Brenda's jaw dropped. Walter's smug expression finally dissolved, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. He started to back away slowly. The officer spoke quietly into his shoulder radio. A moment later, he turned his full attention back to Brenda. "Ma'am, I need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back." Brenda started screaming, a high-pitched, animal sound of pure terror, as he clicked the cold, heavy handcuffs onto her wrists. Walter started yelling that they couldn't do this, that he was going to sue them all for harassment. The second officer, having run Walter's ID and clearly found something she didn't like, calmly walked over to him. "Sir, you're also going to have to come with us. You're under arrest for breaking and entering, criminal trespassing, and destruction of property." We just stood there on the grass, Lorraine and I, wrapped in a state of profound shock, as we watched the police lead both of them, my pregnant, screaming sister and her horrible, belligerent boyfriend, in handcuffs to separate patrol cars. As the doors slammed shut and the sirens wailed to life, cutting through the quiet suburban night, a single thought echoed in my mind, over and over: it's over. It's finally, truly, over. If you are still listening to my story, if you've followed me on this insane journey all the way to this moment, could you do me a small favor? Please take a second to like this video and just comment with the number 1 down below. That's all, just the number 1. It lets me know that you're here with me, that my story has reached you. Your support means more to me than you could ever know. It gives me the courage to keep sharing. So please, comment with the number 1, and let me tell you how this unbelievable story finally came to an end. The aftermath of that night was a chaotic, surreal blur. The landlord of Lorraine's apartment had to be called, and he was furious about the broken door chain and the illegally changed locks. A locksmith had to be summoned in the middle of the night to drill out the new deadbolt and install another one. It turned out the new owners, a young family with 2 small children, were arriving with their moving truck that Sunday morning. We had less than 36 hours to clear out the mess Walter and Brenda had made and get Lorraine's actual belongings out. It was a frantic, exhausting effort, fueled by coffee and sheer adrenaline. Friends came to help, and together we worked through the night, packing and cleaning. By the time Lorraine's moving truck pulled away on Saturday afternoon, we were all running on fumes, too tired to even process the full scope of what had happened. I truly thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The final act was yet to come. On Monday morning, while I was at work, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a man with a tired, official-sounding voice. He introduced himself as a lawyer, Brenda's court-appointed public defender. "Am I speaking with Audrey?" he asked. "Yes, this is she," I said cautiously, my guard immediately up. "I'm representing your sister, Brenda, in her immigration and criminal cases. I'm calling because she has made a rather serious and unusual claim. She is stating that she is, in fact, your legal surrogate, and that the child she is carrying is biologically yours. She claims there was a signed contract that was unfortunately lost when she was unjustly removed from what she claims was her legal residence." I was so utterly flabbergasted, so completely blindsided by the sheer insanity of this new lie, that all I could do was laugh. It was the same incredulous, bitter laugh I'd had in the restaurant, the one that signaled my final break from her. "A surrogate?" I finally managed to say. That's the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. That is an absolute, demonstrable lie. I am not looking for a surrogate, I have no contract, and I have absolutely no biological connection to that child. My sister became pregnant by accident with her ex-boyfriend, Walter, the man who was arrested right alongside her. The lawyer let out a long, weary sigh. It was the sigh of a man who was overworked, underpaid, and knew, with absolute certainty, that his client was a sinking ship filled with lies. Well, I have to follow up on my client's claims. But without a DNA match or a signed and notarized contract, her story won't hold up in court. But ma'am, you have to understand the gravity of her situation. Her immigration status is very precarious. At this point, she is almost certainly going to be deported. As her only family in the country, a statement of support from you, perhaps an offer to take temporary custody of the child once it's born, could significantly influence the judge's decision. No, I cut him off, my voice cold and hard as steel. Absolutely not. The answer is no. If she gets deported, then that is the direct consequence of her own actions. As far as I'm concerned, her only family is in her home state, not here. Please do not contact me or my sister about this again. I hung up the phone before he could say another word, my hand trembling slightly, not with fear, but with rage at her final, desperate attempt to drag me into her disaster. That was the last I ever heard of the surrogate fantasy. A few days later, Lorraine got a call from our mother. Brenda had been given a choice by the immigration judge: face formal deportation proceedings, which would result in a 10-year ban from ever re-entering the U.S., or accept a voluntary departure, which was less damaging to her permanent record. She chose to leave. Of course, she had no money for the plane ticket. Lorraine and I had one final phone call about Brenda. We didn't even need to debate it. We agreed to pay for the ticket. It wasn't an act of kindness or forgiveness. It was a business transaction. It was the closing cost on our own freedom. We went online together, booked the cheapest one-way ticket we could find, and sent the confirmation email to her mother. It was the last dollar we would ever spend on her. We then made a pact. We blocked Brenda's number, her social media, everything. We sent a group email to our extended family, calmly stating that due to recent events, we were no longer in contact with Brenda and respectfully requested that they not share any news about her with us in the future. We were building a wall, and it was impenetrable. The day our flight took off, I was sitting in my garden. I didn't know the exact time, but I felt it anyway. A subtle shift in the atmosphere. A weight I didn't even realize I was still carrying, a low-grade, constant anxiety, simply lifted. I leaned my head back, felt the warm afternoon sun on my face, and I took a deep, clean breath. For the first time in almost a year, I felt truly, completely at peace. The storm had passed. It left a trail of wreckage and heartbreak in its wake, but it also cleared the air, washed away the toxic rot that had been poisoning my life. It taught me a hard, painful lesson about boundaries, about the critical difference between helping and enabling, and about the fact that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself, and even for someone else, is to walk away. I lost a sister in that storm, but I found myself. I found my strength. And that's a trade I'd make again every single time. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. If you've ever been through anything even remotely like this, please know in your heart that you are not alone. Feel free to share your own thoughts and experiences in the comments below. I read them all. And please, above all else, take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one.